Zimbabwe! Alright! Viva freedom ya Zimbabwe! Viva freedom ya Zimbabwe!
Yes!
Viva Africa!
Viva!
Viva Africa!
Viva!
Alright.
How good and how pleasant it is for a night to dwell together in one perfect harmony. JAH Rastafari, who liveth and reigneth with I and I continually, ever faithful, ever sure. JAH Rastafari! JAH Rastafari! JAH Rastafari!
One of the things I found myself interested in is the New Age religion of the Rastafari movement. The aesthetics, the music, and the smoking of the herb all fascinate me, and to be honest, has helped me on a spiritual level. What is Rastafari? For those of you who don't know, Rastafari is a New Age religion that is commonly found in places such as Jamaica, New York, California, Toronto, England, Ghana, and South Africa. Its basis goes back to the Great Revival of 1860 to 1861, when many black Jamaicans joined various Christian churches, and such as the other enslaved Africans synchronized their own religious customs with the churches. Given the Afro context of worship, this is what caused missionaries from the Americas to go to Jamaica and help them express their hopes and aspirations while living under a system that ignored them and denied the formerly enslaved masses any democratic rights. Moreover, with other social movements such as Ethiopianism and Back to Africa, these two would be the building blocks that would later lead to the Rastafari movement. Now, in the 19th century, there was a call for the black diaspora to return back to Africa, with many of these movements originating in countries such as Liberia and Sierra Leone. A Liberian preacher named Edward Wilmot Blyton started to promote forms of worship to fit the African context, and that black people should learn more about themselves. This movement is quite similar to that of the Zionist movement returned to Israel, despite many Jews being ethnically different and forming their own cultures, such as Ashkenazi, Beta, Sephardi, to name a few. The same can be said for the Africans, as not all slave descendants came from the same ethnic group. Yet this didn't matter, as the Western world was divided on racial differences, which in turn helped form a bond between the diaspora as they no longer identified as Yoruba, Akan, Igbo, Ibibo, or Mbundu, but black people versus white people, African versus European. And given how these ethnic groups would later mix to form their own cultures, such as New African, Jamaican, Afro-Latino, etc., there was still a call of uniting and coming together to overcome the racial injustice we had and continue to face. Now, one question you might have is, why is it called Rastafari? To understand that, we need to understand a movement called Ethiopianism. This movement perpetuated that Ethiopia represented Africa as a whole in terms of a synonym and a religious place. Throughout Africa, especially in South Africa, Africans would refer to themselves as Ethiopians, despite not coming from the state of Ethiopia. The goal of this was to create a pan-African consciousness that promoted the liberation of the African countries from the European colonial and imperial powers. Now, we must also remember that Ethiopia has several mentions in the Bible and the Psalms. Given how Ethiopia was one of the first kingdoms in the world to adopt Christianity, and the belief that Queen Sheba bore a son from the Israeli king Solomon, you can see where several connections being drawn as to why Ethiopia kind of plays, an important role. Of course, this connection was reinforced in 1916 when rumors of a Jamaican reactionary activist by the name of Marcus Garvey was to have said, quote, "Look to Africa for the crowning of a black king," end quote. Despite this quote never really being verified, but in 1930, Rastafari Makonnen was crowned Emperor of Ethiopia, no longer making him a Ras, which is a title that of a duke or equivalent to, quote, head of, like a head of state, for instance. And he went on to change his name from Tafari Makonnen, Tafari meaning one who is respected, to Haile Selassie, which translates to Power of the Trinity. Moreover, his title in Ge'ez, an archaic Ethiopian language that is only spoken within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, is Nagusa Nagas, which translates to King of Kings, and of course this would be a confirmation to what would become the Rastafarian movement that Christ had returned, or his prophecy had been fulfilled. Now, for others, this is absurd, but we must take into account the history behind it. The House of Solomon, one of the longest ruling dynasties in Ethiopia, is rumored to have connections to King Solomon, one of Israel's rulers, as he had a child with Queen Sheba. In fact, many Ethiopians claim that they are descendants of King Solomon, and given the biblical importance of Ethiopia and there also being a Beta Israeli population within Ethiopia, to them this seems like enough evidence to prove them correct. Another major thing to remember is that the iconography that House Solomon used is the Lion of Judah, which is important for the tribe of Judah, which in fact is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And the constant use of the Star of David, along with how even today the Ethiopian Orthodox Church still use some Jewish practices compared to the rest of the Oriental Orthodox churches and even the Eastern Orthodox churches. And one last final note to take into account is that we are looking at a group of people that were subject to generations of trauma and abuse, and are searching for an identity in a world where colonialism is keeping them down. And instead of having a class outlook, their outlook was mainly based on culture and race, which in turn led to movements such as these popping up. And with one stating that we are Ethiopians, and given how Ethiopians have a history with Judaism and Christianity, patterns are made and connected. We shouldn't scorn people such as the Rastas or any group, but try to empathize as why they chose the path that they chose. I'm getting off topic, let's move on. The early Rasta movement started in the early 1930s, and like with any other movement, looked very different than it does today. The original four members that promoted the divinity of Haile Selassie were Leonard the Gong Howell, keep note of his nickname by the way, Archibald Dunkley, Robert Hines, and Joseph Hibbert. They started preaching in the capital of Jamaica, which is Kingston by the way, and the message soon spread, and mainly spread among the poor communities. Given how this was the Great Depression, Howell is often described as the leading figure of the movement, and his message that Jamaicans should swear their allegiance to Haile Selassie rather than King George V, who was the current king that held dominion over Jamaica at the time, caused for some concern for the upper class, which in turn caused him to be arrested in 1934. He would be released 2 years later and would form a community of Rastas, attracting a number from 500 to 2,000 people. That's right, 2,000. In the St. Catherine Parish, the group managed to be self-sufficient, but the ruling class feared that they were training rebels and overthrowing the colonial government. And the community would be raided, and Howard would again be arrested, but this time he would be admitted to a mental institute. Now, the said community would survive, but they would be, harassed until it shut down in 1954. During the 1950s and the 1960s, there was another wave of Rastafarians on the rise. With constant oppression they faced from the government, both colonial and post-colonial, led to the Rastas' contempt with how Jamaica was being ran, often calling things such as the police, bureaucracy, established churches, etc. as Babylon. Babylon is a reference to the occupation the ancient Israelites faced during the rule of Nebuchadnezzar II. But despite this, it continued and not only spread throughout Jamaica, but throughout the Caribbean, America, and even the United Kingdom. Needless to say, this wasn't well received by the populace, and especially not by the government. The populace would often make rumors about them, which led to further discrimination. For instance, one of the things I remember reading from No Woman No Cry, a book by Rita Marley, she stated that one of the rumors that were spread about the Rastas was how they would kidnap children, despite this not being true. The use of cannabis was another issue people had, and given the poor research done at the time of the drug, it led people to believe that they were just addicted junkies. Also, there was a militant branch of Rastas that planned to overthrow the government. Wait, what the fuck? Yeah, that surprised me too, and I only found out while I was typing the script. To be honest, this really shouldn't be all that surprising, but it still caught me off guard. So, the group was called the Vanguard, and they formed during the 1940s and 1950s, and were primarily located in West Kingston. They gained infamy after a backlash grew when one of their members murdered a woman in 1957, and the next year they failed to capture Kingston in the name of Selassie. Yes, this actually happened, and continued to happen, which eventually gave Rastas a bad name, and now they are being seen as a terrorist org. This continued throughout the 60s, with major clashes in 1963 when the Coral Gardens incident occurred, which was a skirmish between Rastas and the police which resulted in several deaths. In 1964, there was a major clampdown on cannabis use, which is the holy herb according to the Rastas. With the constant tension between Rastas and the Jamaican government, it should be asked, did Emperor Selassie know of this religious movement surrounding him? And if so, did he do anything about it? Selassie was indeed aware of this, and he opposed being seen as a reincarnation of Jesus Christ, and would encourage the Rastas to convert to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Haile Selassie visited Jamaica for a delegation on the 21st of April, 1966. Yet, when the Emperor's plane landed at the airport, hundreds of thousands of Rastafarians stormed to the plane, making it hard for the Emperor to exit. It took until a well-respected member of the Rastafarian community, Mortimer Plano, to help soothe the crowd and tell the Rastas to make way for Selassie. This day, which would be called Groundation Day, would become an important day to Rastafarians, second only to the Emperor's coronation. During his trip there, Selassie would lay a wreath at Marcus Garvey's grave, talk to the Prime Minister, and give gold medals to various Rasta members. He had defied the Jamaican authorities' wishes to rebuke the Rasta's claim to him as God. When later Prime Minister Michael Manley visited Ethiopia in 1969, he asked the Emperor as to why he didn't tell the Rastas he was not God, to which the Emperor responded that he was amazed by the Rastas' reception to him and that he felt that he had to be respectful to their beliefs. Now, you can take that as you may. Whether he liked the attention or not is up to you, but it should be noted that he did say that Jamaicans should not come to Ethiopia until the issues of Jamaica had been fixed. It should also be known that Selassie did end up sending an archbishop of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Abuna Yasahak. I'm sorry if I mispronounced his name, and keep note of this man, to help convert the Rastas to the Twahedo Church. Abuna was very respectful to the Rastas and respected their culture, yet would often guide some of them to the Orthodox Church. But some of the preliminaries to join the church was the cutting of dreadlocks. At first, this wasn't mandatory, but after the revisionist organization known as the Derg overthrew the emperor in Ethiopia, former Rastas were forced to cut off their dreadlocks and renounce Rastafari. Now that we have gone over the origins of the Rasta movement, I think now is the time to move on to the culture of the Rastas. Let us first go over the three big things they are known for, first being dreadlocks. Rastas believe dreadlocks are promoted within the Bible, specifically in the book of Judges by the biblical character Samson. For those of you unaware of the story of Samson, he was a judge in the book of the same name, who was known for being the last judge of Israel and having awesome strength. His strength had come from his hair, which were dreadlocked. It was said if his hair were cut, he would lose his strength. Moreover, the dreadlocks are seen by the Rastas as a covenant made between them and JAH and is a part of their commitment to naturalness. Speaking of naturalness, Rastas are often vegetarian or vegan, depending which mansion you are a part of, as they follow a diet called Aitel, which is food that is grown or produced locally. They state that the book of Leviticus is the reason why they should avoid foods such as pork, shellfish, and for some Rastas, even fruit. Most Rastas eat rice, vegetables, fruits, and fish, depending on the mansion, of course. Rastas often refuse to eat food made by women that are on their menstrual cycles, and this can be seen as a reflection of certain West African beliefs when doing certain tasks such as iron making. And often avoid alcohol. Again, some mansions allow limited consumption of alcohol as long as they don't get inebriated. Rastas will not consume anything processed. This includes canned food, packaged salt, and soda. This even extends as to how they prepare their food, as they avoid iron and instead use clay pots. Now, the reason why they avoid using iron is they believe that if they eat anything that was cooked in iron, the iron will be transferred over from their food to their livers and kidneys, thus damaging them. Now, people that do have a Rasta diet tend to have a low risk of getting heart failure and a lower risk of developing any form of cancer. This is thanks to the rich nutrients within the diet. One of the most well-known attributes of Rastafari is the use of marijuana. The use of marijuana, or what they call herb, can be seen as an integral part of Rastafari, but in reality, not all Rastas smoke it. When we talk about herb use, we must remember this varies from Rasta to Rasta, as some only use it on certain occasions such as holy days, while some smoke it all the time, something which some other Rastas believe is excessive. and there are those that abstain from it, stating that they already have reached a higher state of mind and do not need it. Now, as to why the Rastas use it at all, well, that's because it is considered a sacrament, with passages in Psalms, Genesis, and Revelation promoting it, and that it has healing properties and can promote peace and love, as well as able to reach inner divinity when high. You'll see this goal of achieving inner divinity being common among certain Niger Congo beliefs. Now, whilst marijuana effects on a person is still being researched in terms of recreational use and how it affects people in the long term, it should be noted that the mystical properties of the plant are based on metaphysics, and while there are people such as myself that use it for religious purposes, we should not have this rose-tinted glasses view of it being the way to create peace or one love. It's nonsense. Nor should we have this purity view that I see some people have, thinking that, oh, if you smoke it will lead you to think bad thoughts, or oh, this is just a hedonist way of life. To do so is anti-dialectical and, well, just quite silly, to be honest. It should be known in Jamaica that only Rastas and people with medical cards have the legal right to smoke marijuana, and that in other countries such as America, depending which state you live in, possession is still illegal. However, despite this, marijuana has been one of the more well-known aspects of Rastafari. But it should be remembered that given how the movement is decentralized, each Rasta has a different relationship with it. The aspect of Rastafari that is well known across the world is the music that has come from the movement. Rastas will often have what is called reasoning sessions, where members play drums, chant, and dance to commune with JAH. This is, of course, has its roots in Niger Congo polyrhythmic rituals, where people would celebrate and worship their respective deities. The drumming is usually attuned to old Christian hymns, but will also include original Rasta songs. They also believe that doing this helps with ailments such as headaches, colds, and fevers. Again, this practice further reflects older practices of their enslaved ancestors. Now, Rastafarians often use popular music to get their message across, and can be heard in the most earliest forms in the early 60s with music such as ska. We wouldn't see the rise of what we know as reggae until 1968, as it had a slower musical style but heavier rhythms, and the rise of patois becoming more commonly spoken in songs. With this rise, we see the Rastas spreading their views of society, which wasn't new, but what was new was the messages being more radical than in previous genres. Reggae also incorporated a lot of Rasta elements, such as chants, and as mentioned previously, social commentary with songs such as Legalize It by Peter Tosh, Zimbabwe by Bob Marley, and Time So Hard by Al Campbell, just to name a few. Reggae would gain world recognition during the mid-1970s, with many black people seeing it as music of the oppressed. But not all Rastas liked reggae, especially during the time it became popular. Reason being, as they just saw it as commercializing the religion, which is understandable. As anything gains popularity under capitalism, it will eventually become commodified and reduced to a product for profit, as we see with other religions, strata of people, and so on. Moreover, reggae has been used by non-Rastas, such as Protestants, and most Rastas in fact do not listen to reggae. One of the other things that I find interesting in the use of language within Rastafari is that they have the mystical view that words have an intrinsic power, and often avoid words that self-degrade or objectify others. They use what is called Rasta talk as a way of attacking the use of English by the Jamaican government. We must remember that this religion is in response to the English colonialism and seeks to separate itself from the European world. Ironically enough, the Rasta dialect has been absorbed by the greater populace of Jamaica, by both practitioners and non-practitioners. Some example of Rasta talk is the use of the pronoun I, which refers to the self as divine. Sometimes you will hear Rasta say I and I instead of we, I rate instead of I create, and I see instead of I receive. Furthermore, when referring to Haile Selassie, they will often say Haile Selassie to demonstrate his divinity. Rastas also believe that the phonetics of a word should be connected to its meaning. If you ever heard the song Downpresser Man, which was just playing, by Peter Tosh, you might have picked up that downpresser means oppressor. This is because oppression bears down on people rather than lifting them up. Another example is that instead of using the word dedicate, they use livicate, as they believe the phoneme dead is too close to the word, well, dead. Lastly is their symbols. Usually the most notable symbols are the tricolors of red, gold, and green, which is in reference to the flag of Ethiopia, which in turn represents richness of land and fertility, hope, and lastly, sacrifice. The Lion of Judah, which is the symbol of the House of Solomon, which Haile Selassie was a part of. Not to mention the use of the Star of David. This isn't appropriation per se, because to understand why they use Jewish symbols, one must know about the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and Ethiopian history. If you recall from earlier, the House of Solomon is said to be related to King Solomon of Israel, as it is said that Queen Sheba bore him a child. Even today, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there are Beta Israelites, or what are also called Ethiopian Jews, who still live in Ethiopia, as well as in occupied Palestine. Moreover, there is a heavy emphasis on the Old Testament within the Ethiopian Church, so we often see this blending of Old Testament beliefs, or the original Torah, along with Christianity. Given that Rasta sees Selassie as the Messiah, and given that said Messiah was a part of the Ethiopian Church and part of the House of Solomon no less, it only makes sense that they would use these symbols. Moreover, these aren't the only symbols the Rastas use. There are also a lot of symbols of Pan-Africanism and Afrocentrism in adopting Marcus Garvey's original flag, which is green, black, and red. And they will sometimes use all four colors. Now, Rastafari had a point of decline due to two major events. First being the overthrow of Haile Selassie and later his death in 1975, and the other being the death of reggae legend Bob Tough Gong Marley in 1981. The decline of Rastas in Jamaica had led to other Christian groups to recruit former members, including the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and one of the most notable members to join the Ethiopian Orthodox Church was Bob Marley. Now, I don't think many people know this, but Bob Marley converted to the Twahedo Church on the 4th of November, and the man that converted him was Archbishop Abuna Yashak. As I said, I hope you remembered him. The same Archbishop Emperor Haile Selassie sent to Jamaica after his visits. Reggae too was also affected by this decline, as the Rasta's message lessened over time and a new genre known as dancehall was becoming more popular. Rastafari and reggae wouldn't see a revival until the mid-1990s, with artists such as Buju Bantu, Sizzla, Capleton, and some of Bob Marley's children, such as Ziggy Marley and his brother Damian Jr. Gong Marley. With this musical revival, it exposed a new generation of people to the Rasta movement, and with this came converts. In fact, today there are current estimates of 700,000 to 100 million of people that identify as Rasta, with many members joining the faith due to feeling alienated within the world and also marginalized and poor. In an article from the magazine Religion Today, Cashmore stated that, quote, "Whenever there are black people who sense injustice disparity between their own material conditions and those of the whites that surround them and tend to control major social institutions, the Rasta message has relevance," end quote. So we can see here that Marx's notions remain true, that religion is the opiate of the masses. This is not to disrespect those that practice Rastafari. As I mentioned earlier, I am myself religious. This is just a common Marxist analysis. This is also interesting from a psychological perspective, as the contradictions between racial groups shape how they perceive one another. They will often form communities that either seek to build themselves up, whether that be via religion, cultural nationalism, or anything else. It is important to note that human psychology, like all sciences, is a dialectic. When contradictions are laid bare, the people find ways to rectify them with varying degrees of results. Now that we have gone over the history, beliefs, and practices of the Rastas, let's now move on to the mansions. Now, for those of you who are unaware, instead of saying denomination, they refer to their sects as mansions. Reason being is that it is a reference from the Bible in John 14:2, quote, "In my Father's house there are many mansions," end quote. The three more well-known mansions are Bobo Shanti, Niabengi, and the one Bob Marley was a part of, the 12 Tribes of Israel. There are also other smaller groups within Rastafari, such as African Unity, Covenant Rastafari, Masonic Dreads, and Selassian Church, but we'll be going over the first three I mentioned. But before doing so, it is important to know that the Rastafari movement is not a unified movement, meaning there is no centralization, hence why they oppose the term Rastafarianism. So the belief system varies, with the only commonality is that Haile Selassie has in relation to the Messiah in some way. So keep that in mind when we go over these three. First, let's go over the 12 Tribes of Israel. Now, the 12 Tribes of Israel was formed in 1968 and have their headquarters in Kingston, Jamaica. The group was created by Vernon Carrington. This specific group has been described to be closer to Christianity and Messianic Judaism, which is a form of Judaism that is syncretic to Christianity. This group does not see Selassie himself as the Messiah, but a representative of the Messiah himself, given that he has relations to King David and Solomon, and that him taking his throne in Ethiopia was his fulfillment of the prophecy. The 12 tribes of Israel are also very metaphysical when it comes to numbers, and what that means is that the 12 children of Israel also represent the 12 months of the year, and this is why for some members, Bob Marley is the 11th child of Israel, and comes from the tribe of Joseph, given that he was born in February. This is further reinforced when Bob Marley quoted a biblical passage about Joseph in front of his album, Rastaman Vibration. When it comes to use of marijuana, this mansion believes everyone has the freedom to use the herb, but only if they want to, showing that it is not really required to take the substance. As mentioned not too long ago, Bob Marley was a part of this mansion, but he wasn't the only notable member to be part of this group. You also had members such as Dennis Brown, Mikey Dread, and Freddie McGregor. This sect is open to all people and promotes an anti-racist message, but still uphold the uplifting of black people, as said by Marcus Garvey. The next mansion is the Nyambingi Mansion, and it is said to be the largest and oldest of all the mansions. Now, this mansion is noted to be more militant as they try to retain their identity, as they had back in the 1940s. So this means that dreadlocks are mandatory and patriarchal rules are enforced. Now, they get their name from the 19th century Queen Nyambingi of Uganda, who had fought against the British for her country's independence. Now, unlike the 12 tribes of Israel, they hold that Selassie was the Messiah and uphold that he should have been leader of a global theocracy. Now, they are considered to be the most strict out of the three mansions and often uphold anti-racist views, promote nonviolence, oppose any form of oppression, and they believe that those who do oppress other people will be punished by JAH. It is also worth noting that this mansion had also heavily influenced the music scene within Jamaica. If you remember, to this day, Nyambingi culture still heavily influences reggae, rocksteady, ska, and even hip-hop. Even in songs that are secular in nature, use these chants and rhythms in their songs. As for why the Nyambingi use these methods themselves, it is said that it is a way to remember their African heritage, which isn't far-fetched given that the Niger-Congo people, which for whom a majority of us in the diaspora are descendants of, have history of using polyrhythmic music and chanting in form. Lastly, we have the Bobo Ashanti, and this group by far is the most interesting one. This group was founded by Emmanuel Charles Edwards in 1958, 10 years prior to the 12 tribes of Israel and 4 years prior to Jamaica's independence. The word Bobo means black, and Ashanti being a name of an ethnic group, which is one of the people that were enslaved and taken to Jamaica. This group is known for having the unique belief that their founder, Emmanuel, is part of the Trinity, which is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, or Holy Ghost to some people. With this instance, Emmanuel being the priest, other beliefs include that Marcus Garvey and Haile Selassie are also part of the said Trinity, with Marcus being the prophet and Selassie of course being the king. They use Revelation 5 to justify their position on seeing these three men as material reincarnations of the previous Trinity. The Bobo Ashanti are a completely self-sufficient group, not living in cities or with other Rasta groups. The majority of the Ashanti tend to live in Bull Bay, Jamaica. They often reject the common lifestyle of Jamaican society, going so far as even having their own constitution. Another aspect that separates them from other mansions is that the Bobo Ashanti tend to wear long robes, turbans to cover their dreadlocks, and carry brooms to represent cleanliness. The Bobo Ashanti are known for emulating the Old Testament way of living, from having rules for menstruating women to the observation of the Sabbath, where they abstain from work on Friday during sundown to sundown on Saturday. When it comes to marijuana usage, the Bobo Ashanti don't produce it or smoke it in public. Reason for them not producing it was due to marijuana being illegal in Jamaica for quite a long time, and the usage is only done during times of worship with other members. This mansion strictly avoids consumption of salt, oil, and sugar compared to the other mansions that only avoid the processed version of these items but being allowed to use natural salt, sugar, and oils. The avoidance of things such as sugar goes as far as avoiding foods such as mangoes. Now, as for their diet, the Bobo Ashanti are strict vegans and will fast twice a week on the first Sunday of every month. Unlike the previous mansions, the Bobo Ashanti forbid consumption of alcohol, social or otherwise. When it comes to skin color, the Bobos believe that black skin was blessed by the sun and that black women are the birth of creation. Moreover, they believe that the word Africa is improper and made by white people. Instead, they use the terms Ethiopia and Israel to refer to the continent. They also believe that Israelites were originally black and the diaspora scattered them throughout the world. The Ashanti Mansion also has a unique way of greeting one another, often saying, quote, "Blessed my love, Lord and Empress," end quote, which brings up the gender roles within this mansion. Whilst the Nyambingi have strict gender roles, the Bobos have a more unique view. Whilst they have the stereotypical roles of men doing the work and the women being responsible for reproductive labor, the women are mandated to cover their hair and legs with turbans, while men are considered to be priestly figures and are often responsible for conducting religious services. Given their strict views and practices, the other mansions often poke fun of the Bobo Ashanti by calling them the Jamaican Taliban, as they often are compared to fundamentalist Islamists. Yet, despite all of this, the Bobos have a strong relationship with their local communities, often selling non-Ashanti members straw hats, brooms, and even inviting them to services. Indeed, given this friendly attitude with strangers, there has been a growth within their church globally within communities being found in Africa, Europe, and throughout the Americas. Today, there are several musicians that are well known for being part of this mansion. These include Capleton, Sizzla, Anthony B, Luton Fire, and many more. And those are the 3 mansions of Rastafari. And with that, that'll be the end of the video. Hopefully you have learned something new about the Rastafari faith. As I had stated at the start of the video, this religion has always fascinated me, and I'm happy to share such information with you. If you want to learn more about this religion, I will have sources in the description that talk about this faith in greater detail. Now, I must remind everyone that it is important to remember whenever dealing with the topic of religion, we shouldn't have this broad stroke, as it varies heavily among people, and no one group is a monolith. It is important to approach this from a class lens, of course, but we cannot just use a blanket statement when it comes to one's beliefs. I plan on doing more videos similar to this, so if you enjoy this type of content, I hope you look forward to that. I hope you have a good day, afternoon, evening, or whenever you're watching this. Yeah, peace.